You can feel the iron before it touches you. The heat comes in waves, distorting the air between the brand and your skin. And in that half-second before contact, you understand that what comes next will rewrite who you are. The searing metal presses into your forehead, and the world collapses into a single point of white agony. You smell your own flesh burning. You hear laughter not from strangers, but from men you served breakfast to yesterday morning. The brand reads Fug, Fugitivus, Runaway, and it will mark you until the day you die. Her name was Livia, and 2 weeks ago she was someone's trusted cook. I still can't believe people from Lagos to Lima, from Mumbai to Melbourne, are watching these stories unfold. If you're here right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. There's something profound about connecting across centuries and continents over moments that shaped what it means to be human. This is Rome in the 1st century A.D., when 1 in every 3 people walking the streets of the empire was property. Not poor, not indentured. Property, human beings classified in law, alongside livestock and furniture, bought and sold with the same paperwork used for auction. The empire's magnificence, its roads, its aqueducts, its literature, its marble forums rested on the backs of millions who could be beaten, raped, or killed without legal consequence. But the system had a vulnerability. Slaves could run. And when they did, Rome responded with punishment so calculated, so theatrically brutal, that the message would echo through every household in the empire. Freedom is not an escape from suffering. It is a gateway to horrors that make slavery look like mercy. What you're about to learn has been carefully edited from the histories we inherit. Not because the evidence doesn't exist, it does, in the dry language of legal codes, in the casual mentions within letters, in the administrative records of facilities whose purpose was never openly stated. But historians prefer to discuss Roman slavery as an economic system, a labor arrangement, a legal institution. They are less eager to describe what happened in the compound south of Rome, where women who ran were taken to be processed, where branding was only the beginning. Livia ran because her daughter was sold. That's what the records from the Laurentine facility note in their intake log, a single line of administrative Latin that translates roughly as female, 28 years, household class, motivation, pursued separated offspring. The bureaucratic language flattens what was actually a mother's desperate calculation. Her 10-year-old daughter had been sold to a merchant in Ostia, whose appetites were known but never prosecuted. Livia had spent 6 years as a kitchen slave in a senator's household, trusted enough to manage the household's food budget, educated enough to read receipts and maintain accounts. She knew running would mean punishment if she was caught. She also knew what was happening to her daughter. The choice, when framed that way, was no choice at all. She made it 11 days. The slave catchers found her on the road to Ostia, exhausted, out of money, trying to beg information about a child whose new name she didn't even know. They returned her not to her owner, but to a facility designed specifically for runaways, a place where examples were made. The Laurentine labor compound sat on a hillside south of Rome, close enough to the capital that its reputation could circulate through the slave quarters of every major household, far enough away that its operations could remain administratively vague. It processed approximately 400 runaways annually, according to surviving tax records, though the records categorized them as transferred labor assets rather than captured escapees. Most were sent to the mines, where life expectancy was measured in months. Some went to the quarries where it stretched to perhaps 2 years. Others went to agricultural labor gangs, which was considered merciful by comparison. And then there were the special assignments. The intake process was designed for maximum psychological impact. Runaways were brought into a central courtyard where other captured slaves, some freshly branded, others bearing the scars of weeks or months in the facility, were chained in rows, forced to witness what awaited them. The administrator, a man named Quintus Ceruleus Rufus, would personally examine each new arrival, reading their history aloud, dissecting their motivations, explaining with theatrical precision why their reasoning was flawed. "You ran for your daughter," he told Livia, his voice carrying across the courtyard so that every chained woman could hear. "You imagined you could find her, rescue her, as if a slave has the right to rescue anyone, including herself. Your daughter is property. You are property. The affection you feel toward her is irrelevant to law and irrelevant to reality." Then came the brand. The brazier was kept burning in the courtyard's center, the iron heating until it glowed. Livia was held down by 4 guards, not because she fought, but because the theater required her helplessness to be visible. When the iron touched her forehead, she made a sound that was not quite a scream, not quite a sob, but something in between that the other women would remember long after she was gone. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the scent of the courtyard's olive trees, beauty and atrocity occupying the same breath. But branding was only identification. The punishment itself came next. The facility operated on a dual system. During daylight hours, the women worked the quarry, behind the compound brutal labor, but survivable. Strong women could break stone for years without dying. The nights, however, were different. The nights were revenue. Rufus had refined a system over his 12 years administering the facility. Wealthy men paid substantial fees for access to branded runaways women who could be used in ways that permanent household slaves could not, because runaways weren't expected to return functional. The arrangement was never officially documented. The payments were recorded as facility maintenance fees. The women were listed as temporary labor transfers, but everyone involved understood the transaction. For the price of 2 months' household wages, a man could spend an evening with a runaway slave in one of the compound's private chambers, and whatever happened in those rooms carried no legal consequence. The women couldn't report abuse, they had no legal standing. They couldn't refuse, they had no rights. They couldn't escape, they were already marked as runners. Livia learned this on her first night. The chamber was almost comfortable cushioned benches, oil lamps, wine amphorae arranged on a side table. It looked like a room designed for pleasure if you ignored the chains mounted to the walls and the instruments arranged on a table in the corner. The man who arrived was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the casual confidence of someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. He examined her the way you might examine a tool before purchase, noting the fresh brand on her forehead, the fear she was trying to suppress, the way her hands trembled despite her efforts to still them. "They told me you ran for your daughter," he said, pouring himself wine. "That's almost noble. Stupid, but noble. Did you really think you'd find her? Did you imagine some reunion, some escape together into freedom? You didn't wait for an answer. Women like you always have reasons. Reasons don't change outcomes." What followed lasted 4 hours. The details are not recorded in any official document, But the pattern was consistent across testimony from survivors who eventually made it out of such facilities. Women who later gave statements to Christian communities documenting the empire's cruelties. Accounts preserved in church archives that secular historians often dismiss as exaggerated. The pattern involved not just physical violation, but psychological dismantling. The clients paid not merely to use the women, but to break them, to hear them beg, to watch hope drain from their eyes. When Livia was returned to her cell that night, she couldn't walk properly. Another woman older, bearing brands on both her forehead and her arms, helped her to a pallet. "First night is always worst," the woman said. Her name was Tertia. She'd been in the facility for 7 weeks. You learn to separate yourself from what's happening. You learn to go somewhere else in your mind while they do what they do. "How long do women survive this?" Livia asked. 4 weeks average. Strong ones make 6. I'm at 7. I'm exceptional. Tertia's laugh held no humor. The work doesn't kill you, it's survivable. The nights kill you. The combination kills you. Most women stop eating after week 2. Stop sleeping after week 3. By week 4 they simply stop. But Tertia had a secret. She'd survived 7 weeks because she had help. His name was Marcus, a guard who'd worked at the facility for 3 years and had grown increasingly disturbed by what he witnessed. Not disturbed enough to quit, he had debts, a sick mother, the usual architecture of obligations that keeps people complicit in systems they despise. But disturbed enough to help, in small ways that carried enormous risk. Extra food smuggled into cells. Warnings about which clients were scheduled, so women could mentally prepare. And occasionally, very occasionally, he helped someone escape. "Why?" Livia asked him, during a brief moment when he was supervising the quarry and could speak without being overheard. "Why risk yourself for slaves you don't know?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "My sister was a slave," he finally said. "Household servant for a merchant family. She ran when the master started visiting her room at night. They caught her. Sent her somewhere like this. She lasted 3 weeks." He looked directly at Livia. "I couldn't save her. Maybe I can save someone else." He'd been working on an escape plan for Tertia forged transfer documents, a bribed wagon driver, contacts in Rome who could provide shelter. But the plan could only work for one person. The margins were too narrow, the risk too high, the resources too limited. One woman moving quickly with papers that wouldn't be scrutinized carefully. 2 women doubled every danger. When Tertia learned that Marcus was helping Livia instead, she didn't rage or plead. She simply asked Livia one question. "Do you know where your daughter is?" "Ostia, a merchant named Gaius Publius Felix. That's all I learned before they caught me." Tertia nodded slowly. "Then you have something to escape toward." "I don't. My son was sold 4 years ago. I don't know where. I don't even know his new name." She reached out and took Livia's hand, a gesture of physical connection that the facility was designed to make impossible. "Let me help you get out. Let me do something that matters before I die here." The mathematics of the sacrifice were brutal. Tertia had perhaps 2 weeks remaining. Her body was failing in ways that could not be reversed. But Livia was still strong, still functional, still capable of making the escape attempt work. The choice, framed that way, had a terrible logic. "If I escape," Livia said, "if I find my daughter, I'll tell her about you. I'll make sure she knows someone helped us." "Tell her to live free," Tertia said. "Tell her never to let anyone own her. That's the only memorial I want." The escape happened on a morning when fog rolled in from the coast, thick enough to reduce visibility to a dozen paces. Marcus had arranged for a supply wagon to arrive early, driven by a freedman who owed him money in silence. Livia was hidden among sacks of grain, covered so thoroughly that even a careful inspection wouldn't reveal her presence. Tertia created a distraction, deliberately collapsing during the morning quarry work, convulsing as though seized by illness, drawing guards and administrators away from the gates. The wagon passed through the compound entrance without incident. By mid-morning, Livia was in Rome. The forged documents identified her as a recently freed slave from a deceased owner's estate, a common enough situation that it wouldn't attract immediate scrutiny. The brand on her forehead was explained as an old error, legally challenged and resolved, though the scar remained. It was a fragile story, but Rome was full of freedmen and women with complicated pasts. If she moved quickly, it might hold. She reached Ostia 2 days later. The merchant's house was modest but well-maintained, the home of someone who'd accumulated wealth through trade rather than inheritance. Livia watched it from a distance for hours, learning its rhythms, counting servants, looking for vulnerabilities. She couldn't simply knock on the door and demand her daughter back. She had no legal standing. She was technically still escaped property. What she did have was desperation refined into clarity. She waited until evening, until the household had settled into the routines of dinner and lamplight. Then she approached not as a suppliant but as someone with business to conduct, carrying herself with the confidence of a free woman who expected to be taken seriously. When a house slave answered the door, Livia announced she was a representative of the merchant's trading partner in Rome, carrying urgent information about a delayed shipment. The specifics were vague, but delivered with enough authority that the slave hesitated, unsure whether to turn away someone who might be important. That hesitation was enough. Livia was admitted to wait in the entrance atrium. When Gaius Publius Felix appeared, she saw him register the brand on her forehead, saw calculation flicker across his face. "You're not from any trading house," he said. "No, I'm here for my daughter. You purchased her 6 months ago. Her name is Livia, though you've probably renamed her. She's 10 years old. I want her back." Felix could have called for guards immediately. Instead, he studied her with something approaching curiosity. "You escaped from somewhere to come here. The brand tells me it was a punishment facility. You risked recapture for a child who is legally my property. She's my daughter. She's my slave." But his tone wasn't cruel, merely factual. "You understand I could have you arrested right now. Return to wherever you escaped from. The punishments for second offenses are considerably worse." "I understand. I'm asking anyway." A long silence stretched between them. Felix seemed to be weighing something, turning over possibilities in his mind. Finally, he said, "Wait here." He left. Livia stood in the atrium, preparing for guards to arrive, preparing to run or fight or accept whatever came next. But when Felix returned, he wasn't alone. The girl who followed him was thin, her hair cut short in the style of household slaves, wearing a simple tunic that had been carefully mended. She looked nothing like the daughter Livia remembered. The child had been round-faced, quick to laugh, always moving. This girl moved carefully, economically, like someone who'd learned that attracting attention was dangerous. But when their eyes met, recognition flared like a struck flame. "Mama?" Livia couldn't speak. She dropped to her knees and opened her arms. and her daughter ran into them with a force that nearly knocked her over. They held each other, crying, while Felix watched with an expression that was difficult to read. "I haven't harmed her," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. I purchased her because the other bidders at that auction were men whose intentions were transparent and vile. I needed household servants. She cleans, helps in the kitchen, runs errands. I have not used her for anything else." He paused. "I have daughters. I've imagined what I would do if someone took them." Livia looked up at him, still holding her child. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're about to ask me to let her go, and I'm trying to decide whether to say yes." Felix crossed his arms. "I paid 200 denarii for her. I have legal documentation. Releasing her means losing that investment and potentially facing questions about why I'm freeing slaves without formal manumission proceedings. It's complicated. I have nothing to offer you except gratitude." "I know." Felix was silent, then spoke quietly. "A ship leaves for Massilia at dawn. Cargo vessel, but they take passengers. If a woman and child were aboard, no one in Rome would think to search for them there. You're helping us. I'm giving you information." He produced a small leather purse. "Enough for passage and a month's lodging. Payment for your daughter's labor legally defensible." Livia's hands trembled. "Why?" Felix glanced at the child. "Because law defines what's legal, not what's right." They left that night. The ship departed Ostia at dawn, carrying cargo and 2 names meant to be forgotten. Massilia was real. Livia found work as a scribe, her literacy buying bread, shelter, and her daughter's freedom. Tertia died 3 weeks later. The facility logged it as routine loss. No ceremony. No record of sacrifice. Marcus was arrested 4 months later. Discrepancies in supply records, patterns in disappearances, and debts suddenly erased drew attention he couldn't escape. Under questioning, he denied everything. Under torture, he admitted enough. He was executed quietly, his body dumped beyond the city walls, no family notified, no rights allowed. The Laurentine facility continued for another 40 years. Administrative logs show efficient numbers: 400 to 500 women processed annually, categorized, assigned, disposed of. The private chambers remained profitable. The system functioned exactly as Rome intended. But Livia lived. She reached Massilia with her daughter, who grew up speaking Latin and Greek, married a shopkeeper, and raised children who knew slavery only as history. On difficult nights, Livia told her about Tertia, the woman who endured 7 weeks of destruction and refused to break, whose sacrifice made escape possible.